Hello everyone, I'm Kasper. Let's see, I'm just gonna get this finger going. Let's see. Used to be on a Rails core team. These days I just do consulting, focus on Rails. And today I want to talk about how we often as developers, we end up talking about writing code, but today I actually want to focus on just reading. Let's see if we can do this part. Specifically reading open source. Because I've gotten a ton out of just breaking open gems and seeing what's in there and learning from what other people have written. And I think this could help you out a ton too. And of course, with open source, there's a vast library of code you can read. Are you good with levels? Okay. Let's see. Because in fact, for Ruby, there's over 180,000 gems. So there's a ton of code out there you could read and potentially learn from. And some of the things I've gotten out of this is just seeing new Ruby syntax in the wild. How is endless methods working or whatever? How does it look like? New Ruby methods like array partition or things like that. Or new tricks. Here's how you can do something maybe in a way that's a little bit more clever but still readable. Or new names, a new concept. And part of what I do is I try to be a sponge when I'm in something, immerse myself in the library and see what it's doing and just read through it kind of. Let's see. So today I want to define sort of two different reading modes that I've sort of used. I'm borrowing a little bit from compiler language, if you've seen that, where I like to read ahead of time, diving into a library kind of from the top down and start breaking it a little bit apart and see what it's doing. And then I also like to sort of read just in time when you're trying to figure out a bug or something like that. Okay, let's get more into that. So ahead of time is where you open a gem or repository and read what you can. You basically follow your interest. If you're not interested anymore, you just skip to something else. And ahead of time is for preparation and practice. So it's both to learn new things, like I was talking about, then you can then use when you next set out to write code, but it's also to prepare you for reading just in time for, well, we'll get to that now. Just in time is what I define as learning just enough when you need it, like when you're upgrading a gem or figuring out a bug, for instance. But then when you're in that mode of trying to figure something out, diving into and reading new code is potentially quite stressful, particularly if you're already frustrated or angry at a difficult bug. So this is where they kind of work together, where I like reading ahead of time because that helps prepare me to see new code if I'm then having to debug something in a gem or whatnot. So I want to make sure this link is clear enough. So in Ruby, we got acronyms. We got -1, of course. So I think I found out one that's just as easy to remember, basically. I think there's room for one more. And of course, it's super easy, super simple. Read ahead of time so that we can also read just in time. And then it's, yeah, exactly. Super easy to pronounce. You do it yourself. Now, where I read, when I do ahead of time, I tend to do it just on GitHub because it's just less friction than having to manage a copy or whatever. And GitHub's UI these days I find to be quite good at this, and they have like a simple representation where we can click around and so forth. But then whenever I do the just-in-time reading, I tend to just do bundle open. And if you don't know that, you can also, sorry, what? Anybody say anything? Or is this like feedback? Okay. Cool. So bundle open lets you basically pop open a gem, the one that you're using in your app at the same version and everything. And then you can see the help output if you want to here. And you can configure whatever editor you want for that. I just happen to have set up as default. Cool. See? And then the reason I use bundle open is because I'm usually doing the just-in-time reading where I want a specific version of the gem that I'm bundling because it's something in there that I'm trying to debug. So that's the reason for that. So today we'll cover 3 different cases, 2 ahead of time readings, one I did in Rails at one point, and something I learned from Minitest reading that. And then a just-in-time case that basically happened last week actually where I helped debug something. Let's see. You can't see it. Okay, cool. I saw a notification on my screen, Marco. But it didn't show up there, so that's good. Thanks. Let's see. Okay, so I want to walk back to how this started for me when I first got into just reading things. Basically, in 2013, Google runs this thing every year that's called the Summer Code, where they pay a student to work on open source for a summer. I saw Rails first participating, and so for 2 weeks I worked on a proposal, submitted it in, and then I got picked to do it essentially. Can you see that okay? Announcement back in 2013, I'm at the bottom there. There was one more I couldn't fit in, but yeah, something to do with HTML standardization and so forth. So as prep, I figured I'll just read all the Rails. It'd probably be easy, right? I'll just start from one end and read all the way through. I'll just read ahead of time and it'll be fine. But then even in 2013, there's a ton of code in there So I don't know why I thought this was possible. It was just, being a junior, I guess. So when I showed Tom as a friend of mine, he basically described it as what a truly dumb heroic endeavor. And I really like that phrasing for it. But anyway, I want to replicate what that actually looked like, just a starting point of it. So I think we should just proceed, basically. So a tiny bit more background before we get to what it looks like, just how Rails is actually configured or set up. It just bundles other gems, basically what we need to have now. And back in 2013, there was these libraries in there. Action Pack, Action Controller is basically within there, and Action View as well. And then there's Action Dispatch, it's routes, mailer for what you send out with mailers, Rail ties everything together. Active Record, you probably know. Active Support is then the one I knew about because it's a lot of orthogonal small things, so it's easy to read. So let's see. Okay, I think we're open to, okay, so now I gotta do something here, let's see. Gotta go back to mirroring, okay. And then I found, where was the window? So basically what happened was, okay, I think you can read this okay. So I just went to Rails on GitHub like 11 years ago, and then clicked on Active Support. This is right here. And then we'll wait for that to load. Okay, cool. And then there's a bunch of files in here we don't have to care about. I'm just going to show you where blank and present live, essentially. So we're going to dive into the lib directory, and then we're going to dive further into the Active Support sort of nested structure here. And then we want to go into the corex folder. And when I was doing this like 11 years ago, I was just clicking with reckless abandon and just seeing what happened and what was in there. We'll get to more of that in a second. So let's see, I think it's an object actually. Blank, there we go. And so this is the default implementation. There's some overrides since 2013 for Active Record itself that sort of optimizes a little bit. But this is what they actually look like. So you probably used blank before, if you used Rails or present as well, and here's where they are. So not too scary in this case to dive into it. Cool. So that was the first bit, I think. Let's see, gotta jump back. Okay. Don't mirror. And then, okay, cool, perfect. So, let's see here, summary. We went to Rails, we clicked on Active Support and drilled into it a little bit more, then we read what blank and present do. So in my case, this went on for a while. I was just clicking through, reading things, seeing what was in there, and then I ended up, giving up on trying to read Rails because there was a lot of code there. I didn't need it for the project I was doing at the time. That was just an action view. So it was just, I don't need it right now, but I still learned a ton from just diving in and seeing what was in there. And what stuck with me from doing this was that it's not about getting it 100%. Really, it's about taking advantage of the fact that open source isn't a black box. Quite literally, you can open up and start reading the source. So in my case, I suggest just reading the parts you can, and then you want to come back and then read more, or go read something else. And what you've learned from that then helps you read the other part. And all of this stuff helps you read what you do in your everyday, so it makes that code easier as well. So it's less of a potential lift, if you will. And for my case, when I'm doing this stuff, I've come up with a few reading principles that I kind of keep to as I was preparing this talk. Basically, the first one is just to just click things, just see what happens. I'm actually going to dive into it a little bit more later. Okay, and then you want to remain neutral, and then you want to keep coming back. So let's dive into what they mean. For me, when I say just click things, it is just kind of what I'm doing in a demo. Like, we don't have time to show all of it, but it's just clicking around, see what happens. Click on a method, click on a file, see what's in there, and just basically be curious and see, I wonder what's in here. Okay. And you're not necessarily looking for anything particular. You're kind of just following your interest. And at some point, something you haven't seen before pops up. It's like, oh, this is okay. I want to dive into that a little bit more. You might be saying things like, oh, that's an interesting name, or what does this method do? Is this a Ruby thing? Oh, why did I lose? What happened there? Let's see. Okay. Or also, what the hell is this? Which I kind of just did at a presentation. Okay. So the next bit is remaining neutral. When you encounter a file that's either quite advanced or whatever, you might be saying other things to yourself, like, I should know this stuff already, like what could this even mean? Or if you've never seen partition before, it's kind of, what's going on here? Or I should need to dive into this, right? Because all the real developers can just figure everything out from the documentation. Or things like, I'm not smart enough to get this, or there's too much magic. But what I would recommend to you is if you judge yourself, what is going on here? Okay, that's not what I wanted. It's a little slow. Okay. But judging yourself stops you. So, for instance, there was a number of different clicks in a small demo there where if I had been like, I shouldn't look at this or whatever, it would have slowed me down a ton as opposed to just being able to just click around and see what's in there and not interpreting it as meaning something about myself. I basically try to think of this more as like listening to new music. You probably wouldn't say to yourself, can I even listen to like jazz if you've never listened to jazz before? You don't tend to describe it as something about yourself. It's more like, do I like this or not? Let me try it and see what happens. So I guess with music, we'd basically just try listening. And I recommend with the same thing if you try to open and read something to do the same. Just try reading and see what happens. And another point I want to make is that for me, at least, when I see a lot of super smart people here, it's kind of, for me, it's not always smarts. For me, because of having done this reading work, I know it's partly context. Like, even though I don't understand anything that I saw earlier from the El Rama talk, kind of, it's like I know there's bits and pieces and keywords that I can kind of put together, and I know that it's, obviously he's smart, but that's not what I'm saying, but it's more, it's the context too, so you can still do it even if you haven't done it before. It just takes a while to immerse yourself and learn that. Okay. So it's having seen similar things in the past and then also expanding your knowledge bit by bit. And then for me, reading helps me build that context. It helps me have this base that I can then keep diving into new code that I haven't seen before and expanding it. So then I know more that I can do later and so forth, or use in my own code. I also try to set anger and frustration aside. Like, this is more if you're working on a bug or something like that's grinding you or whatever. So it's easy to get angry and frustrated when you're in that state. But those shut you down and make it harder to have new ideas to understand what's going on. So I try to set those aside and basically have an open mind. And then part of the exercise is also just to keep coming back. For me to get good things out of this, it's important to just have it be more of a practice. You want it to be something that you revisit over and over, essentially. And those two first principles, like just click things and remain neutral, are there to help keep it fun and engaging and pressure-free to read, so you do come back to read. Because otherwise, you're probably not going to come back. And then the good news is with practice, you'll be quicker. You'll basically be quicker at... Oh, it's freezing here. Is it ready? No. You'll be quicker at parsing brand new code than splitting it into chunks, either picking up new names or concepts and already knowing how to integrate them, spotting different styles and patterns. You'll basically find your own way over time. And part I want to say too is that this is a This is a process. It's not just a one-time task. It's not just like go in and read one file and then I'm done. It's basically using those principles to keep coming back and keep either rereading the same thing or finding something new, and then having that extra expertise help you with the first thing, sort of. So it's kind of back and forth in that sense. So yeah, it's these three, basically. They help keep me going back. They help keep me curious, so I'll basically try to look. Because in my experience, it is... Oh, it's freezing a little bit. No. It's much better just to look. Because sometimes you'll be surprised that it's easier to read than you thought. Like, I don't know how many of you looked at blank and present before, what they actually do, but they were both one-liners, and one of them just used the other. So those were in and of themselves not too difficult, I hope. And you could also form an idea in your head that open source is for just the wizards, but it is just code at the end of the day. And some of it might be closer in your reach than you think. Okay. Be gentle, okay. Let's see, before the next part, I just want a quick aside. I want to make a broader point about learning something that I've also found really useful when I'm basically trying to learn something. Because I kind of see there's two paths when you're learning something. You can either like follow a laid out path, like a tutorial or class, and that's generally about making things easier, and that's totally fine. But for me, there's another option that I've been using, and that's basically making things, come on, way harder. There we go, okay. I've gotten so much out of this, like the basic thing of I'll just read Rails. It's fine, we'll figure it out. But you have to acknowledge that you're doing something that's kind of way outside of your capacity, so you don't go back and judge yourself. And then you'll get what you get out of it. If you only get 5% out of it, then you take those 5%. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can still learn a ton from doing that. So that's sort of my approach, is just, at the deep end isn't that deep. Let's just dive in there and then we'll see. And then sometimes it's a little bit too deep, and then other times it's kind of not too bad. Okay, so in my quest to read things ahead of time, I also dove into and read Minitest source. And I basically learned a concept there that stuck with me ever since. It's a common OOP concept. We'll get to that. So the reason I dove into Minitest is that it's Ruby's default test framework. So if you know how it works, you know how the default test framework in Ruby works. And these days it's around 1,200 lines, at least the main file. I checked the other day. Back then I think it was like 1,000 lines, so it's grown a little bit. So it's something that you can sit down and read in maybe a couple sessions or things like that. You don't have to understand everything, but at least I felt a super confidence boost when I'm just trying to parse it out and what I was doing. So within Minitest, there's an abstraction that handles this stuff, both printing the dot when you run a test, like the period there, or an F or an S for a failed or a skip test, and there's also something that runs this line here with the one runs when assertions and so on. So as I was reading, I found out it was handled by this basically. There's a reporter class, it responds to this record method, and it takes a result. Another thing, by the way, notice there's no parentheses there. This is another reason why I think it's fun to read Minitest, because it's using what's called Seattle RB style, where they don't want to add any parentheses. They basically try to remove parentheses until the interpreter complains. So everything has no parentheses if they can get away with it. So I think that's really fun to see, because it's quite a different style than sort of what's common today, because this is before Euruko even existed and so forth. So there are these reporters. It responds to this record method and does something with it. And then there's these other classes here. There's a summary reporter, which handles the dot. And there's a statistics reporter, which handles these one assertions. And they also respond to this record method and do something with it. So, but I was wondering, but wait, Minitest uses both of these at the same time, but the functionality is split between two classes. How does this work? At the time, I just couldn't put two and two together for how this was actually working. So I also found there was this thing called a composite reporter. And already I liked the name. I was like, composite, that sounds really cool. I don't know what it does. So I saw it also had this record method like the other ones, and it also inherits from the same abstract reporter class. We don't have to get into that. But it also has the shovel operator, as it's called, where you just like append a reporter to some sort of internal state. We don't have to see that right now. But then on the configuration side, Minitest does this. It does self-reporter, puts it into this composite reporter, shovels on both of these, the summary and the statistics, and then somewhere it calls record. And the result of the reporter will then be the composite reporter. And I still couldn't wrap my head around how this was working, because I was thinking, how is this record doing this stuff? It must be super complex. And so when I then saw what it actually was doing, I was kind of, wait, what? It's just looping over an array and then calling the record method on the internal reporters that it has, like the summary and statistics. And I just like, wait, what? It's that simple? I could not put it together of how it was actually working. I couldn't believe that it could be that simple. Now, I'm a self-taught programmer, so I didn't know at the time that this was a common concept in computer science, which is part of why I like reading things, because I just rediscovered an actual concept outside of like a university setting just by diving into reading things. And this is basically polymorphism. It's where you have multiple types that respond to the same method and interface, and then reuse that so you can swap them out and call, record on these different reporters, and it will kind of just work basically. And have sort of these like elegant interfaces, I feel, where it's just doing an each loop and it works. And you can just shovel the other reporters on there. And you can add your own too, which is what a lot of gems do. Okay. See, now let's dive into a JIT case I had from last week where we're reading just in time. So there's a little bit of setup to this one too. I was helping someone debug a case they had where they were using, well, actually they had this, like, they didn't have a post class, but something like this where they were originally having this post have a content column on itself. But then they were swapping that over to using action text, which is what the hazard text does. But they were also using the audited gem, which I didn't know existed before last week. I just hadn't worked with it before. But basically what that does is it tracks changes to classes. So you can, have an audit table for what someone did something here and we want to be able to capture that or maybe show it in UI, something like that. So they were trying to migrate their class to using action text, but then what action text actually does is it doesn't use the column on like the post table here. It's a separate action text rich text record. So they had found a GitHub issue on audited where someone was suggesting to do this bottom line where they're calling the audited method is the main interface to set it up so it tracks changes. but then they were hitting a different issue. They didn't know something else was happening. And let's see if we can demo some of that. Okay, quick aside then, let's do a little bit of ahead of time reading for this as well, because it's going to be useful for what we're doing. So a while back or whatever, I tend to dive into things. I don't remember when this happened or whatever, but I'm curious, how does YAML actually work? How does the parsing work? How does the dumping? How does the loading work? I just want to see it. So sometimes I just go to the front page of it and start seeing what's in there and exploring that. So we're going to look at that now. And Ruby API is technically not the official docs. I just think it looks a little bit nicer. So that's kind of my. Let's see what happens if I click here. Okay, and then I need to mirror. Cool. Okay. Okay, you can see this right. Okay, let's see. Maybe bump it a little bit. So part of what we're seeing here is that YAML is just. This module provides a Ruby interface for data serialization in the YAML format. Okay. The YAML module is an alias of psych. Okay. And then that's the YAML engine for Ruby. Okay, interesting. But you do a require, you can do a load on some syntax. Okay. And then you can dump it as well. And you get something similar looking out to what was passed in here. Okay. So there's a load and a dump on this YAML module. And then there's also this thing called psych. Okay. So I'm going to file that away for later. And then let's see. I want to show you something else, actually. So I just want to demo what it looks like, because typically what I do when I try to process something like this is just open up a console, start playing with it. Let's see if we can do that. So I want to show you these things where, I think I have a Rails console here. I hope this is, let me boost this a little bit. What happens if I do that? Okay, cool. Okay, let's see, boost a little bit more. So I'm just going to define this class, call it hello, there's nothing special about it, and then let's see what happens if we try to dump this. Okay, dump it. That works. Okay, let's see what happens if we try to load it again, just for fun. Okay, so we get an error that says it's a disallowed class. Okay, and it says hello there, and try to load an unspecified class. Okay, so we're not going to dive into this more right now, but I just want to show what that looks like. It's important for what happened last week. And another thing we could do, actually, quick aside, is in IRB these days, there's also a show source method. So you just point it at the method you want to look at, and then it'll actually show it to you. Let's see here. What's going on here? You don't have to read this part. I know it's ironic when I'm saying read open source, but it's a way to dive into methods, and maybe that safe load will give you a clue to what's actually going on and what some of all the other options are. We don't have to get into that right now, because, let's see. So what was happening was we had the post model. Same looks the same. And then we have the line in config application.rb, the one I was talking about where I just set up the audited thing. But then what they were doing was they were trying to do post.create, I think, content. And they were doing they had some HTML in there and some content in there, some very, cool content, whatever. And then they tried to serialize that. But then because they configured audited to try to also capture what's going on with these actor records, on this action text rich text record, they were hitting this error we just saw. This action text content thing, don't know what that is. But so what we do, and my approach again is just to look. So we basically did, let's see if I can hit this. I did a bundle open on audited. I hadn't seen it before. I don't know what the gem does. So I just want to open it up and see what's in there. And then what we did was we just searched for audited and so on. Okay, so there's some different results here. Let's try to just search for the whole word and see if we just want the one method. Okay, so it seems to be in here, in this auditor class, and it's a long method. What we did on the call was just walk through section by section and block by block and seeing what it's actually doing. I'm just going to call it out a little bit here. You can see it's setting up an has many. So on the action text, you could have a has many audits, for instance. There's also a bunch of callbacks being set up here. That's also potentially interesting. Now, as it happened, there wasn't anything like a smoking gun in here for what's going on. So, but for me, or at least helpful, just to settle in my mind, okay, now I know roughly what this audited method does because I hadn't seen the gem before. So just reading it just in time, just to see what it's doing. And then I could just put that away for now and see what's going on. So the other thing we did was, and I have to run back here, we also did, now I want to dive, so once we've seen that, I want to dive into what's in action text. And then we want to see what's going on in text. Because I had read this before, and I remember some parts about it. There was a line that we wanted, which is this one, to serialize, and then there's that action text content again. So now what I'm curious about is seeing what's in the content then. So that's what we're doing. We're just jumping back and forth. We're just trying to find keywords that seem helpful to what we're looking at right now, and then using it as a jumping off point to dive into the next bit. and not reading too much right now. Okay, so now we're in the content thing. It does a bunch of stuff. Let's see. I'm just trying to basically scan or see what's relevant. This looks like complex, all this stuff. But I see there's a serialization here, so let's try to dive into that first. Serialization. Okay. So that's interesting. It has a load and a dump. Now, because I've read, well, we also read the, well, that's actually not important right now, but I know from having read what's going on, the serialized method from active record, I know it uses these load and dump methods. So immediately as I saw it, it's like, oh, I know what these are. That's what's that using. And then you can see in the compatibility layer, for Marshall is another serialization format, but it's basically aliasing these methods because it uses underscore load and underscore dump. So that's what's going on down there. It's like, oh, we're in the right spot for what's going on. And we know how this action text content wants to be serialized because we can see that in this method. It wants to use to.html, so storing raw HTML in its format. And so basically what was happening with this audited record was that it's trying to save the changes to this internal content as like a YAML column in itself, so it could be potentially quite large. So that's what we found out from diving into it, and then we knew that the next place to look for was to try to figure out how can we make this work with YAML loading, essentially, and trying that out. So that's what we did. I don't have time to cover that, but that's there. Let's see. Let me get back out. Cool. Oh, that works. Okay. No, wait. You're gonna see my notes, aren't you? Let's see the stop mirroring thing. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, that works, cool. So that was what we did in the just-in-time demo. So to summarize that, we read a bit of YAML ahead of time, and then we filed that knowledge for later. I'm simulating what it is for me, in shortness of time. We used that knowledge to debug an issue and helped us find what we were going for faster. Instead of spending hours on it, we spent a little bit of time on it instead. In real life, that's what happened, last week when this actually happened. Then we looked at a source of audited and action text, and used that as jumping off points to find the next little bit we needed. And we saw that action text content doesn't support YAML serialization. So that's the next clue for what we were then figuring out. We don't have time to cover what we did, but so that's kind of what I'm doing. Let's wrap up of seeing what the hell we just did. We learned about ahead of time reading and just in time reading. We nibbled at some Rails reading. We also became expert at polymorphism from Minitest. I think that's clear. I count that as a win. Okay. We used ahead of time reading to debug while we were also doing a little bit of that just in time, so we're combining both those reading modes. And again, my reading principles, when I'm trying to do this is to just click things. I'm just clicking on the rich text thing because I see that there, and then I want to see the next thing where it's the content, using those keywords as jumping off points for the next thing. I'm just clicking around, seeing what's going on, and we're remaining neutral. I'm not judging myself as we're doing it. We're just sort of flying by the seat of our pants in a way and trying to figure out what the next little bit is. And we keep coming back where when I'm reading ahead of time, it's just, oh, we just had an issue with action text. Now I want to jump back in a little bit later and see what the rest of it is doing, because now I see a little bit of this part, so I don't have to read that part again. Now I can do the next little bit and understand it a little bit more. So that's kind of the talk in a way. If you want to work with me, this is my GitHub profile. There's an email there. I'm an independent consultant, do this kind of debugging work as well, and a bunch of other stuff. Let's see. I just want to give a special thanks to people who helped with the talk here. Both to you, Kim, you were really helpful. Also with the sticks, as you saw, when we came in. Sam as well, and Thomas helped. So thanks so much. That's it. Just in time. Just in time, yeah. Oh, I didn't.